The day my world shattered, I remember the way the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow over the bus station, like the whole world had been dipped in something sour. My small fingers clutched the straps of my backpack, the cheap fabric digging into my shoulders, while my other hand squeezed the ear of my stuffed rabbit, Mr. Flops, until I thought his stitching might burst. My mother stood in front of me, her face a mask I couldn't read. She didn't hug me. She didn't kneel down to look me in the eye like she used to when she was pretending to care. She just looked at me, and then she said it. Those four words that would echo in my skull for years. She'll figure it out. I didn't understand. 7-year-olds aren't supposed to figure it out. They're supposed to have someone hold their hand when the world gets too big, too loud, too scary. But she turned and walked away, her sneakers squeaking against the grimy tile, and every step she took felt like a hammer cracking my chest open. I called after her, once, twice, my voice thin and reedy, swallowed by the hum of engines and the murmur of strangers. She didn't look back, not once thought the air smelled like diesel and old coffee, and I wanted to vomit, my stomach twisted, my throat burned, and my eyes stung with tears. I refused to let fall, because somewhere deep inside, even then, I knew if I started crying, I might never stop. So I stood there, frozen, as the automatic doors hissed shut behind her, and just like that, I was alone. Truly, alone. No one to tell me where to go, no one to pack my lunch, or braid my hair, or whisper that everything would be okay. Just me, a backpack full of second-hand clothes, and the gnawing terror that maybe I was nothing to her, that maybe I never had been. I didn't move for a long time. My legs felt like they'd turned to stone. Around me, life kept moving. People dragging suitcases, a baby wailing, a janitor mopping up a spilled soda, but I might as well have been invisible. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself, one born from the raw, ugly place where fear and fury collide. I will never let anyone make me feel this small again. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but I knew this: if my own mother could walk away like I was nothing, then I would spend the rest of my life proving I was everything. And that promise, it became the fire that forged me. Because here's the truth about being left behind: it doesn't just break you. If you let it, it remakes you. And one day, when she came crawling back, she'd see exactly what her abandonment had created. That. But that's a story for another time. Right now, I need you to sit with this. The moment your world cracks open isn't the end. It's the beginning of learning just how unbreakable you are. So tell me, what's your fire? What's the thing they told you would destroy you, but instead made you stronger? Because I promise you, the comeback is always sweeter than the setback. And yours? It starts today. The bus station smelled like diesel fumes and stale coffee, the kind that lingers in the air long after the cup's been thrown away. I sat on a cold metal bench, my small body swallowed by the weight of my backpack, clutching my stuffed rabbit so tightly its ears bent under my grip. Around me, life moved in a blur, strangers dragging suitcases, voices echoing off the tiled floors, the distant hum of engines revving outside. But none of it was for me. I was just a little girl, invisible in the chaos, waiting for the one person who was supposed to see me. At first, I counted the minutes. She'll be back in 5, then 10, then 20. My legs swung nervously, too short to touch the ground. I watched the doors, convinced that any second she'd rush in, breathless, apologizing for taking so long. But the minutes stretched into an hour, and the hope in my chest began to curdle. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow on the faces of people who didn't even glance my way. A man in a wrinkled suit dropped his newspaper beside me, and I stared at the headlines like they held answers. They didn't quote top dot. The worst part wasn't the noise, it was the silence inside me. The way my throat tightened every time someone walked past, how my stomach twisted when a woman with my mom's hair color turned the corner, only to disappear into the crowd. I whispered to myself, she's coming. She has to. But the longer I sat there, the more my own voice sounded like a lie. The bus station didn't care about my tears. The world didn't stop because my heart was breaking. And then, somewhere between the third and fourth hour, something shifted. The despair didn't vanish, it just hardened, like ice forming over a wound. I stopped counting, I stopped hoping, and for the first time I looked around and realized no one is coming to save me. That thought should have crushed me. Instead, it lit a fire so small, so stubborn, I didn't even recognize it yet, but it was there, and it would never go out. Tell me, have you ever waited for someone who never showed up? That moment when you realize the world won't pause for your pain, that's when you learn what you're really made of. And trust me, you're stronger than you think. The moment the truth hit me wasn't a single sharp blow, it was a slow, suffocating tide. 1 second, I was still counting the cracks in the bench, tracing them with my fingertips like they were clues to where she'd gone. The next, my chest tightened so hard I thought my ribs might snap. She wasn't coming back. Not in 5 minutes. Not in an hour. Not ever. The realization didn't just settle in. It ripped through me, leaving my 7-year-old heart raw and bleeding. I remember the way my breath came in short, panicked bursts, like I'd been running even though I hadn't moved. My hands clenched around my stuffed rabbit, its fur matted from years of love, its button eyes staring back at me like it knew something I didn't. The bus station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Around me, strangers moved like ghosts, their voices a muffled hum. A woman dragged a screaming toddler past me. A man dropped his coffee, and the sharp smell of burned beans mixed with the stale, sweaty air. And there I sat, alone, not just for now, for good. The worst part, the anger didn't come first. It was shame, a hot, toxic wave of it. What did I do wrong? Had I been too loud, too needy? Maybe if I'd been quieter, or funnier, or just better, she would have stayed. My throat burned with the effort of holding back sobs, because if I started crying, I was afraid I'd never stop. But then, like a spark in the dark, something else flickered inside me. A tiny, defiant voice, my voice, whispered, "If she's not coming back, then I have to." That was the moment the world split in two. The child who still wanted her mommy, and the survivor who knew she had to become her own. I stood up on shaky legs, my backpack feeling like it was filled with rocks. My knees trembled, but I locked them anyway. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know how I'd eat, or where I'd sleep, or what would happen if someone bad noticed a little girl all by herself. But I knew one thing with a clarity that scared me. I would not die in this bus station. Not today. Not like this. And that, right there, was the first brick in the wall I built around my heart. The first lesson in the hardest school of all. The one where you're both the student and the teacher. The one where you learn that love shouldn't have to be earned, but strength. Strength is something you carve out of your own bones when the world tries to break you. So let me ask you this. Have you ever stood in the wreckage of your own life, staring at the pieces, wondering how the hell you're supposed to put them back together? I have, and I'll tell you what I know now. You don't wait for someone to hand you the glue. Asterisk. Asterisk. You start picking up the sharpest edges first. You bleed a little. You learn. And then you build something no one can ever take from you again. That's not just survival. That's power. And it starts the second you realize you're the only one who can give it to yourself. The bus station smelled like stale coffee and diesel fumes, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes long after you've left. I remembered the way the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow over the cracked vinyl seats where I sat, my small hands clutching that worn-out stuffed rabbit like it was the only thing keeping me from disappearing entirely. The world outside the windows was a blur of strangers, hurried footsteps, muffled conversations, the occasional sharp laugh that made my stomach twist. No one looked at me, no one saw me, and that's when I understood I was invisible now. But invisibility, I'd soon learn, could be a kind of power dot. The walk home wasn't just a distance, it was a gauntlet. Every block felt like a mile, every street corner a decision point where I had to choose between fear and forward motion. I passed the bodega where the owner, Mr. Rivera, usually slipped me a piece of candy when my mom sent me in for cigarettes. That day, his eyes lingered on me a second too long. His brow furrowed, but he didn't ask. Maybe he knew, maybe he didn't want to know. The sidewalk cracks became my guides, my rhythm, left, right, left, because if I focused on the pattern, I wouldn't have to think about the fact that no one was coming to walk beside me. The sun dipped low, painting the buildings in shades of orange and purple, like the world was ending in slow motion. And in a way, mine was that, but here's the thing about being left behind. It forces you to look at the pieces of yourself you never knew existed. That night, as I fumbled with the spare key hidden under the loose floorboard of our porch, though it didn't feel like ours anymore, I realized something. The trembling in my hands wasn't just fear, it was energy. The kind that comes when you're standing at the edge of your own life, staring into the unknown, and you realize you have two choices: crumple or climb. I chose to climb, not because I was brave, but because I had no other option. And that's when the shift happened. The world didn't get less scary. I got less fragile. I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The way the neighbor's dog, Old Blue, would wag his tail when I whispered to him through the fence. How the lady at the laundromat always folded her towels in perfect squares. How the stars over the projects looked brighter when you weren't waiting for someone to tuck you in. Small things, survival things, they became my anchors. I learned to stretch $1 until it screamed, to read the unspoken rules of the streets, to turn my loneliness into a kind of quiet strength. It wasn't heroism, it was adaptation. And adaptation, I'd come to find, is just resilience in work boots. Now, I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because I need you to see it. The moment when the thing that breaks you becomes the thing that builds you. Maybe your bus station was a layoff notice. Maybe it was a diagnosis. A betrayal, a door slammed in your face. The details don't matter. What matters is this: you are still here. And that means you've already started figuring it out. The question isn't whether you'll survive. It's what will you build with the pieces they left behind. Look around. Your strength isn't hiding in the past. It's in the hands you're using right now to turn the page. So tell me, what's the first thing you'll create? The days after she left were a blur of hunger and silence. I remember standing in front of the bus station's flickering vending machine, counting the coins I'd scavenged from between the seats. 73 cents, not enough for food, but enough to make me feel like I had a choice. So I chose to save them, because what if tomorrow was worse? That's how my mind worked back then, always bracing for the next abandonment, the next empty promise. The weight of my backpack felt heavier with each passing hour, not because of what was inside, but because of what wasn't. A note, an explanation, a single word that said, "I'm coming back." Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I'd curl up in the back corner of the station, my stuffed rabbit clutched so tightly its seams started to fray, and I'd listen to the hum of the fluorescent lights, the occasional cough of a janitor mopping floors. The worst part wasn't the cold or the gnawing in my stomach. It was the way my chest would lock up every time the automatic doors hissed open. This time I'd think, this time it'll be her. but it never was. And with each disappointment, something inside me hardened just a little more. I learned to swallow my tears before they could fall because crying in public made you a target. A kid who cries is a kid who's weak. And I refused to be weak, thought. The first time I stole, I shook for hours afterward. Not from guilt, from the sheer terror of being caught. It was a granola bar from a convenience store, and I justified it by telling myself I'd pay them back someday. I did years later with interest, but that moment taught me something crucial. Survival isn't pretty. It's not the heroic montages you see in movies. It's dirty hands, it's lying about your age to get a job washing dishes. It's learning to smile at strangers so they don't ask too many questions. I mastered the art of looking like I belonged, even when I was sleeping in a laundromat. Even when my shoes had holes so big, my socks stuck to the pavement when it rained out. The emotional whiplash was the hardest part. One minute I'd be fiercely independent, proud of myself for figuring out how to ride the bus across town or barter for a hot meal. The next, I'd be pressed against a bathroom stall, sobbing because I couldn't remember the sound of my mother's voice. I'd stare at my reflection in the mirror and practice saying, I don't need her until I almost believed it. Almost because the truth was, I did need her. Not the version of her who left, but the one I'd invented in my head, the one who'd come back with arms wide open, who'd tell me it was all a mistake. That fantasy kept me going, even as I learned to stop waiting for it. Here's what no one tells you about being abandoned. It doesn't just leave a scar, it rewires you. You start seeing the world as a series of threats and opportunities, and you get really good at telling them apart. I learned to trust my instincts before I learned to trust people. I turned my loneliness into a kind of armor, my independence into a weapon. And when she finally did show up years later, standing on my doorstep with that same hollow look in her eyes, I realized something that nearly knocked me off my feet. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. Done waiting, done hoping, done letting her absence define me. Dot. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt like the world left you behind, I need you to hear me. Asterisk, asterisk, the strength you're building in the dark. That's the kind that lasts. Dot asterisk asterisk. It's not the strength of someone who never struggled. It's the strength of someone who looked their worst fears in the eye and said, not today. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to keep going. One granola bar, one bus ride, one deep breath at a time. Because the person you're becoming in the process, that's the one who's going to change everything. Dot. Here quote see your script for chapter 06. Written in exact alignment with the voice profile and video context. You think you know what it's like to be alone until you're 7 years old clutching a stuffed rabbit named Thumper. And the only voice you hear is your own, whispered into the frayed fur of his ear. That's where I lived after she left. Not in the cold bench of the bus station, not in the foster homes that followed, but in the quiet conversations I had with a toy that couldn't talk back. And yet somehow always did. That Thumper wasn't just a stuffed animal. He was my confidant, my shield, the one thing that didn't abandon me. When the nights got too loud with my own sobs, I'd press his worn paw to my cheek and pretend he was breathing with me. Slow, steady, there. I'd tell him things I couldn't tell anyone else. She said I'd figure it out. But what if I can't? And in the silence that followed, I'd swear I heard him answer. Not in words, but in the way his button eyes caught the light. As if to say, you already are. I developed rituals around him. Every morning, I'd tuck a note into his pocket. A scribbled promise to myself. Today, I won't cry in front of the other kids. At night, I'd recount my victories to him, no matter how small. I ate all my lunch today.
I didn't flinch when Mrs. Carter raised her voice. Thumper bore the weight of my fears, so I didn't have to. He was the first thing I learned to trust in a world that had taught me trust was a liability. Dot. But here's the thing about coping. When you're that small, you don't realize you're building armor.
You think you're just surviving. I talked to Thumper about my mom too. Angry, heartbroken rants that ended with me clutching him tighter as if he could squeeze the ache out of me. She left me. But you won't, right? And he never did. Not until the day I realized I didn't need to ask anymore. Because that's the lesson no one tells you about loneliness. It forces you to become your own witness. Thumper didn't fix my life. I did. One stitched together courage at a time. And when my mom stood on my doorstep years later, she didn't just see the woman I'd become, she saw the little girl who'd chosen to keep going, long after the world told her to stop. Dot. So tell me what's your Thumper? That one thing, no matter how small, that held you together when everything else fell apart. Because here's the truth, you don't just find strength in those moments. You become it. And no one, not even the person who left you, can ever take that from you. Dot. Why this works for the voice profile, emotional and resolute tone. Raw vulnerability. Oh yeah, you think you know what it's like to be alone. Paired with unshakable resolve. Yoga you become strength. One stay person intimacy. Direct address. Yoga you become strength. Person was personal connection. Transformative energy. Shifts from childhood despair to empowering realization, mirroring the intense and transformative requirement. Narrative richness, vivid sensory details. Thumper's frayed fur, button eyes catching light. Immerse the audience. Authority through experience positions the speaker as a survivor who earned their wisdom, not just a storyteller. Call to action ends with a challenge to reflect. Yoga UK with experience. Seamless flow. Bridges the previous chapter's vulnerability, wearing a brave face to the next chapter's identity building, by showing how coping mechanisms became the foundation of self-trust. Word count 398 exceeds minimum while maintaining natural speech rhythm for voice synthesis. Here's your script for chapter 07, crafted to the exact voice profile and narrative demands. I remember the first time a teacher called me by my full name, not that girl whose mom left her, not the quiet one in the back, but me. Just me. It was Mrs. Carter, my second grade teacher, and the way she said it, like she already knew something about me I hadn't figured out yet, made my chest tighten. That was the day I realized I could be more than the abandoned kid waiting at the bus station. But first, I had to decide who that was. School became my laboratory. I watched the other kids like they were specimens under glass. How they laughed too loud. How they traded snacks like currency. How some of them had mothers who showed up with cupcakes on birthdays. I mimicked what I could.
If Jamie got praised for raising his hand, I raised mine, even when my voice shook. If Sarah's mom braided her hair, I taught myself with YouTube videos, my fingers fumbling until the strands finally held. But the hardest part wasn't the doing, it was the believing, because every time I succeeded at something, a whisper slithered in, "Who do you think you are?" Like my worth was a loan I'd have to pay back someday. Then there were the friends, or the almost friends. Like Daniel, who invited me to his house after school. His mom made grilled cheese and asked about my favorite color, and for 20 glorious minutes, I forgot to flinch at kindness. But when she said, "Your mom must be so proud," I froze. The lie I'd rehearsed, list the work, tasted like ash. That night, I cried into my stuffed toy's ear, not because I'd been found out, but because I'd wanted to be found, to belong to someone, to matter enough to be missed. So I built my own rules. Family wasn't just blood, it was the lunch lady who slipped me extra fruit when she saw my empty lunchbox. It was my neighbor, Miss Rivera, who let me help her garden just so I'd have somewhere to go after school. And belonging? That wasn't a place. It was a feeling I stitched together from small victories. The first A on a test, the time I made the whole class laugh with a stupid joke, the moment I realized I could look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. Here's what I know now. Identity isn't something you're handed. It's something you carve from the scars, from the moments you choose to stand taller than your fear. Maybe you're like me, piecing yourself together in the spaces where you were left behind. Or maybe your battle is quieter, fought in the silence of expectations you never asked for. Either way, ask yourself this: what would you become if you weren't afraid of the answer? Because the truth, you're already figuring it out. One stubborn, beautiful step at a time. Why this works for your voice profile. Emotional and resolute tone, raw vulnerability. So, the lie I'd rehearsed tasted like ash paired with defiant growth. CO Wandol, one step, person intimacy. Direct address, if. Maybe you're like me, creates a confessional, personal connection. Intense energy, contrast, pain. If Rose cried into my stuffed toy with triumphed. If toy stood taller than my fear. Narrative structure, conflict, struggling to belong. Resolution, carving identity with vivid scenes. Daniel's house, Miss Rivera's garden. Call to action. Inspires reflection. If, what would you become? And frames resilience as an active, ongoing process. Authority, rooted in lived experience, no generic advice, only hard-won insights. Flow note, this bridges Chapter 6's coping mechanisms, the toy as comfort, to Chapter 8's outreach, seeking support by showing the internal shift that made asking for help possible, realizing she deserved to take up space. There was a moment, one of those quiet, breaking points where the weight of being alone finally cracked me open, that I realized I couldn't do this by myself anymore. I was 11, sitting on the cold tile floor of the school bathroom during lunch, my knees pulled to my chest, my breath coming in sharp little gasps, because I'd just been told we were doing a family tree project. My hands shook as I stared at the blank paper. What was I supposed to write? A single line with my name at the end? A branch with no roots? That's when it hit me. If I didn't ask for help, I'd keep drowning in silence. So I did something that terrified me more than the idea of being abandoned again. I knocked on my teacher's door after class. Mrs. Hayes was one of those people who noticed things. The way her eyes lingered on me when the other kids talked about their moms packing their lunches or helping with homework. I stood there, my fingers twisting the strap of my backpack, and I whispered, I don't know how to do this. She didn't ask why. She just pulled up a chair, handed me a fresh sheet of paper, and said, then let's build one together. That day, she helped me draw a different kind of tree. One where the roots weren't just blood, but the people who chose to stand by me. My friend Leah's mom, who let me sleep over when the lights got cut off. Mr. Thompson, the janitor, who slipped me extra snacks from the cafeteria when he saw me lingering by the trash cans, pretending I'd already eaten. Even the librarian, Miss Chen, who started setting aside books for me, stories about kids who'd survived things, who'd built lives out of nothing. You're not the first, she'd say, tapping the spine of a book. And you won't be the last. Asking for help didn't make me weak, it made me seen. And that was the first time I understood the difference between being alone and being lonely. One was a circumstance, the other was a choice. I started reaching out, not just because I needed to, but because I realized something powerful. The hands that pull you up often become the ones you later hold on to when it's their turn to stumble. I let my friends drag me to their dinner tables, where I learned what it meant to be fought over. No, she sits by me. and where I tasted home in the steam of shared bowls of soup. I stayed after school for tutoring, not because I was failing, but because I craved the steady presence of adults who showed up, who stayed. And slowly the narrative in my head shifted. I wasn't a girl who'd been left behind. I was a girl who'd been gathered by a patchwork of people who taught me that family isn't always given. Sometimes it's created. So here's what I need you to hear. If you're standing in the wreckage of something that was supposed to love you, reach. Not because you're broken, but because you're building. The right people won't just hand you a lifeline. They'll climb into the storm with you. And one day, you'll turn around and realize you're not just surviving anymore, you're thriving. And the legacy you leave won't be one of abandonment. It'll be one of connection. Now tell me, who's one person you can turn to today? Don't wait until you're drowning to ask for their hand. Start now. We figure it out together. The years that followed that day at the bus station weren't just a blur of time. They were a slow, deliberate unraveling of the child I had been and the person I was forcing myself to become. I didn't just grow older, I grew harder, sharper, like a blade honed by necessity. And with each passing birthday, each milestone she missed, my mother didn't just fade into the background of my life. She became a ghost, haunting the edges of my memories, neither fully absent nor truly present. The anger I carried was a living thing, pulsing beneath my skin, but so was the grief, because no matter how much I tried to convince myself I didn't need her, there was still a part of me, the little girl with the stuffed toy, that ached for the mother she was supposed to be. As I got older, something shifted. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was perspective. I started to see her not as the villain in my story, but as a woman, flawed, broken, maybe even trapped in her own cycles of pain. That realization didn't soften the edges of what she'd done, but it made the weight of it feel different, heavy in a new way. Because how do you reconcile the love you're supposed to feel with the betrayal you actually lived? How do you look at someone who gave you life and also abandoned it without warning? There were nights I'd lie awake, tangled in that question, my heart a battleground between the fury that wanted to scream at her and the exhausted part of me that just wanted to understand that our interactions, when they happened, were never simple. A phone call out of the blue, her voice trembling with some half-baked apology, and me standing there with my hands clenched, torn between hanging up and demanding answers. Or the times she'd show up unannounced, her eyes bright with the hope that I'd magically forgotten, that we could pretend the past didn't exist. I didn't, and I couldn't. But what I could do was choose every single time how much of my peace I was willing to surrender for the sake of a relationship that might never be what I needed. Some days I chose silence. Other days I chose brutal honesty. And in the rare moments, I chose something that felt dangerously like Grace Dodd. Here quote sense what I know now. Healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about learning to carry it without letting it break you. And forgiveness, it's not a one-time decision, it's a daily negotiation with yourself. If you're standing in the wreckage of a relationship that left you raw, if you're staring at the pieces of a bond that was supposed to be unbreakable, I need you to hear this. Your pain is valid, but so is your power. The same hands that once clung to a stuffed toy in a bus station can rebuild a life, your life on your terms. And when the past knocks on your door, begging for a second chance, you don't have to let it in. But if you do, make sure it's because you decided to, not because you were too afraid to say no. Because the strongest thing you can do isn't just survive what broke you, it's deciding what comes next. The knock that shattered the silence years had passed since that bus station. The kind of time that carves grooves into your soul, deep enough to hold both the weight of abandonment and the quiet strength of survival. I had built a life
Not just any life, but one forged in the fire of my own resilience, brick by brick, tear by tear. And then one ordinary Tuesday, the past didn't just knock on my door. It pounded against it with the desperate rhythm of a heart that had finally run out of places to hide. I remember the sound of her voice before I even saw her face. A cracked whisper, barely more than a breath. Please, it's me. My fingers froze mid motion, keys half turned in the lock. The air thickened, pressing against my chest like a hand shoving me backward into the past. For a second, I was 7 again, small and trembling, watching her back disappear into the crowd. But then I blinked, and the illusion shattered. I wasn't that child anymore. I was the woman who had spent years stitching herself back together after she'd been torn apart. The door swung open, and there she stood, smaller than I remembered, her eyes hollowed out by something I couldn't name. Maybe regret, maybe exhaustion, maybe the same loneliness she'd left me with all those years ago. A storm of emotions erupted inside me. Rage, hot and familiar, coiled in my stomach. How dare she? After all this time, after the nights I'd cried myself to sleep wondering what I'd done wrong. After the birthdays and holidays spent pretending I didn't ache for a mother's love, she had the nerve to show up now, when she needed something. But beneath the anger, something else pulsed, weak but insistent, a flicker of pity, because the woman in front of me wasn't the villain of my childhood nightmares. She was just broken. And wasn't I broken once too? I didn't speak, I didn't need to. The silence between us was a living thing, heavy with every unsaid word, every abandoned promise, every moment she'd chosen herself over me. She opened her mouth, and I braced myself because I knew this was the moment where the past and the present would collide. And for the first time, I got to decide what happened next. Here, quotes send the truth about survival. It doesn't just make you stronger, it gives you choices. You can let the wounds define you, or you can let them teach you. You can slam the door in the face of the person who hurt you most, or you can stand there, heart pounding, and ask yourself, what kind of legacy do I want to build from this pain? Because forgiveness isn't about them, it's about you. It's about reclaiming the power they stole from you when they walked away, and trust me, when you realize that, nothing can ever break you again. The door creaked open, and there she stood, smaller than I remembered, her eyes hollowed by years I couldn't account for. The scent of cheap perfume and stale cigarettes clung to her, just like it did when I was 7. My fingers tightened around the doorknob, knuckles whitening. She didn't speak at first. Neither did I. The silence between us was a living thing, thick with every abandoned birthday, every unanswered prayer I'd whispered into the dark as a child. Then, her voice, raspy, uncertain, broke the stillness. I didn't know if you'd even recognize me. I almost laughed. How could I forget the woman who taught me what it meant to be invisible? But I didn't say that. Instead, I stepped aside, just enough to let her in, my pulse hammering in my throat. The moment she crossed the threshold, she crumpled, not dramatically, but like a deflated balloon, all the fight leaking out of her. I'm sick, she admitted, her hands trembling as she clutched a worn-out purse. And I got nowhere else to go. That's when the anger surged, hot and familiar. You had nowhere to go the day you left me at that bus station, either, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But you figured I'd figure it out. Her head snapped up, eyes wide, like she'd forgotten that part. Or maybe she just hoped I had. I was 7, I continued, stepping closer, my shadow swallowing hers.
7 years old, with a backpack full of clothes that didn't fit and a stuffed rabbit missing an ear. You think I don't remember how that felt? The way the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while I counted the tiles on the floor, willing you to come back? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Tears spilled over, but I didn't soften. I'm not here to save you, I told her, and the words tasted like freedom. I'm here because I chose to be, and that's the difference between us. Her shoulders shook as she sobbed. But I didn't reach for her, not yet. Instead, I let her see the woman I'd become, the one who built a life from the ashes of her abandonment. You want help? I asked, my voice low but unshaken. Then you'll listen to me. Really listen, because I'm not that little girl anymore. I'm the one who decides what happens next. The air between us crackled with something raw and unnameable. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the first step towards something harder, understanding. And as she nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand, I realized this moment wasn't about her redemption. It was about mine. Here's what I need you to hear. The people who fail you don't get to define you. But how you rise, that's entirely yours. Maybe your story isn't about a bus station. Maybe it's about a locked door, a silent phone call, or a promise broken one too many times. It doesn't matter where the wound comes from. What matters is what you build on the scar. So ask yourself, when the world tells you to figure it out alone, what will you prove to them and to yourself? That's where your power begins. When I opened that door and saw her standing there, smaller than I remembered, her eyes hollow with the weight of years I'd spent learning to live without her, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger, not anymore. It was the quiet hum of a choice I hadn't known I was making until that moment. I could let her in, not because she deserved it, not because the past had magically rewritten itself, but because I had spent my whole life proving I could survive alone. And now, I wanted to know if I could survive this, the harder, messier work of choosing compassion over the safety of my resentment. Helping her wasn't about absolving what she'd done. It was about looking at the woman who'd left me at that bus station, clutching a stuffed rabbit like a lifeline, and recognizing the broken person she'd been too. She wasn't just the villain in my story. She was a girl who'd never been taught how to love, a mother who'd repeated the cycles she knew, a human who'd carried her own backpack of ghosts. And when I handed her a cup of coffee that first morning in my home, my fingers didn't shake because this was my power. Not the ability to withhold, but the strength to give, even when it cost me. What I didn't expect was how it would unravel me, in the best way. Every time I drove her to a doctor's appointment or listened to her stumble through apologies that could never be enough, I felt layers of my own armor soften. Forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a series of choices to show up, to say, I see you, and I choose to stay. And in staying, I found something I'd never let myself want, a new kind of relationship. Not the one I dreamed of as a child, but one built on the raw, unvarnished truth of who we were now. She would never be the mother I needed, but I could be the daughter who broke the chain. Here's what I know now. Healing isn't linear. It's not a clean severing of the past, but a weaving, threading the pain into something stronger. When I reached out to her, I wasn't just offering help. I was reclaiming my story. I was saying, what you did to me doesn't define me, but how I respond to it will. And that, my friends, is where your power lives too. Not in the wounds others gave you, but in what you choose to build with the scars that. So I'll ask you this. Who in your life has left you at a metaphorical bus station? Who made you feel small or forgotten or unworthy? And what would happen if you dared to meet them? Not as the person they hurt, but as the person you've become. It won't be easy. It might not even feel fair. But sometimes the legacy we leave isn't just about how high we climb. It's about how deeply we're willing to bend, to lift someone else up, especially when they're the last person who deserves it. That's how you turn pain into purpose. That's how you figure it out. Here's the conclusion to my story, written from the heart, with the fire of everything I've lived and the strength I've built. The day I opened my door and saw my mother standing there, broken, trembling, her eyes filled with the weight of years she could never take back. I realized something profound. My pain had purpose, not because it defined me, but because it had forged me. I had spent years believing that her abandonment was the end of my story, but standing there, looking into her face, I understood it was only the beginning of mine. I chose to help her, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved the peace that comes from breaking the cycle. And in that act of defiance against my own bitterness, I found my true power. I built a life she never could have imagined for me. I turned my loneliness into independence, my fear into fuel. I earned my education, built a career, created a home filled with love. Not because I had to prove anything to her, but because I owed it to that little girl at the bus station to show her she was never truly alone. I learned to trust again, to love fiercely, to set boundaries without guilt. And when my mother walked into my life once more, I met her with something stronger than anger, clarity. I helped her because I could, because I had the strength to give what she once couldn't. But I also knew my worth. I didn't let her back into my life to fill a void. I let her in to show her what resilience looks like, to show myself that I had in fact figured it out, that this isn't just my story, it's an invitation. Your past doesn't have to be a prison. It can be the foundation of something unshakable. The wounds you carry, they're proof you survived. The hands that failed you, they taught you how to stand on your own. And the legacy you leave isn't about what was done to you, but what you choose to do with it. So ask yourself, what will you build with your pain? Will you let it harden you, or will you let it hone you? The choice is yours. And when you make it, you won't just be surviving. You'll be creating a legacy of strength that no one, not even time, can erase. Now, take a breath. Look at how far you've come. And then keep going.